This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Nick Miles, and in the early hours of Friday the 28th of December, these are our main stories. The United Arab Emirates has reopened its embassy in Syria, providing President Bashar al-Assad with a much-needed political boost. Hopes of a solution to the US government shutdown have been put on hold after the Senate adjourned without taking steps to resolve it. And Saudi Arabia has announced a major cabinet reshuffle. Also in this podcast, rescuers in India are trying to save 15 people trapped in an illegal mine, but the hope of finding anyone alive is quickly fading. And
it's been a pleasure meeting you and dancing with you. Bye-bye. Sayonara.
Bye-bye.
Are robots the answer to Japan's problem of an ageing population? First to Syria, where President Bashar al-Assad, with the help of Iran and Russia, has regained control of most of Syria. And now he's being welcomed back into the fold of Arab leaders, as the UAE has reopened its embassy in Syria after more than 7 years of civil war. Syria was suspended from the Arab League in 2011, and most Arab states closed their embassies in Damascus in protest at Assad's violent crackdown against the opposition. The Iraqi ambassador to Syria, Saad Mohammed, said it was time other countries followed suit.
Syria
is a country in the heart of the Arab world, a country in an important strategic location in the Arab world. So Syria is a country that can't be ignored by the Arabs. This is a call to all Arab countries to reopen their embassies in Damascus.
Alan Johnston, our Arab Affairs editor, explained more about the UAE's decision.
Go back nearly 7 years when the UAE and other Arab states turned their back on President Assad. At the time, the Syrian civil war was just getting underway, and many people believed it would sweep the president away. But things are very different now. With the help of his Russian and Iranian allies, Mr. Assad has emerged from the conflict on top. Everybody looking on from around the region understands that he is going to be there to stay. And the UAE, at least, appears to have decided that it is now time to do business with Damascus again. The UAE, like others in the Gulf, hasn't at all liked to see the Iranians gaining influence in Syria, and they will no doubt hope that they can work their diplomatic influence in a way that might draw President Assad away from his friends in Tehran. I wouldn't be at all surprised if that's their ambition.
And this is far from the only sign of normalising of relations with other nations.
The reopening of the UAE's embassy is an important step, as important as any so far, but just one in a string of developments of that kind. We saw the Jordanians reopen an important border crossing with Syria a few months ago. Just today, the first commercial flight between Damascus and Tunis has made that journey for the first time in many years. We saw earlier this month the president of Sudan become the first leader of an Arab League state to make a state visit to Damascus. We see that wall of isolation from much of the Arab world beginning to crumble now for President Assad.
And what does all this mean for the Assad regime economically? It's extremely important, isn't it?
Well, Syria lies in ruins. It is a country in need of vast reconstruction, which will be hugely expensive. The Russians and the Iranians don't have the deepest pockets by any means, and those Arab Gulf states may feel that they have an advantage there. They are famously well off even now with the oil price as it is, and they may feel that here is a way that they can exert some influence in Damascus. They have the kind of financial resources that Mr. Assad will be much in need of if he's to put Syria back together.
Our Arab Affairs editor, Alan Johnston. The US Senate met fleetingly to try to resolve a standoff over a partial government shutdown that's now in its sixth day, which has left parts of the government without funding and hundreds of thousands of government workers stranded at home. This has been brought about because of a conflict between Congress and Donald Trump over funding for his proposed wall on the border with Mexico. Tara McKelvey is our correspondent in Washington.
They came together, but there actually weren't very many of them, members of the Senate. It's not entirely surprising that things didn't go their way or that there was no compromise reached. President Trump has not sounded very conciliatory, as you may have seen if you've been watching his Twitter feed. I saw him this morning after he came back from Iraq, and he looked very serious and very focused on at least getting back into the White House, and has not seemed to be in the mood to accommodate the members of Congress who are opposed to his funding for the border wall. He's been tweeting today about the importance of border security and also about the problem, as he would describe it, or as he's characterized it, of illegal immigration. Was not exactly the mood for reconciliation with Congress.
So what now is the earliest date for any possible reconciliation over this, and what needs to happen to achieve that?
It looks as though we will be going into January with a partial government shutdown, as it's known, and what needs to happen is compromise. President Trump or members of Congress need to reach an agreement on these very difficult issues. That these issues are the border security or the border wall. President Trump has asked for billions of dollars to be building this wall. Members of Congress have balked. Whether or not they're able to reach a compromise depends on the individuals who are involved. Once January rolls around, Democrats will take the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, and the chances of President Trump getting more of what he wants, these chances have been decreased with the approach of the Democrats and the majority takeover. So President Trump will have to compromise in a way that he hasn't had to in the past.
Could some of this come down to semantics? I've been reading an article in the New York Times saying it all depends on how you define wall.
The wall is a highly emotional issue, and it is certainly one that's very important to the base of supporters for President Trump. President Trump himself has described the walls in lots of different ways. I remember once on Air Force One when he first told me about the way he wanted to have a wall with holes in it. That was kind of surprising. He's also described the building of the wall in recent days, which some people who are experts in wall security say has not been happening. It really is a matter of interpretation. It's like sometimes the wall becomes an ink blot. Depends upon how you see the world.
Saudi Arabia has been under huge pressure from the international community for the past few months after the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, with accusations that the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was behind it. Now, King Salman has announced a political reshuffle, removing the foreign minister, Adel Al-Jubeir, from his role. He had held the post since 2015 and has now been moved to another role in the Foreign Affairs Department in what's being seen as a demotion. Hanan Razek is from BBC Arabic.
After months of the international pressure on Saudi Arabia after the killing of Khashoggi, it seems to be that something needed to be changed. It's a massive reshuffle, though. It included changes in security positions, the cabinet, and also bringing new entities. And most significantly, I think it's the changing of the top diplomat. Now the former finance minister is the new foreign minister, Ibrahim Al-Assaf. He used to be a former minister for 20 years, between 1996 until 2016. Last year, he was held in the Ritz-Carlton for a short while over corruption cases, and then he was shortly acquitted after that, after they found that he wasn't guilty. And now he's the top diplomat of Saudi Arabia. There isn't an official explanation why Al-Jubeir has been demoted at this point of time, but it raises a lot of questions. Is it how he performed in the world stage over the Khashoggi case? Also, there is something else we need to bear in mind that is changing the scene in the Middle East. The Saudis' very close ally, the United Arab Emirates, reopened its embassy in Syria. The American President Donald Trump said a couple of days ago that Saudi is ready to pay to rebuild Syria. So it tells you that there might be a new phase for Saudi Arabia and the region, and new phase means probably new faces as well.
It's not often that conflict within the top leadership of China's Communist Party is made public, but President Xi is using an old tactic to bring discipline to the party. We're now hearing that top leaders within the Communist Party, the Politburo, are being forced to undergo self-criticism sessions, something that was common under President Mao Zedong half a century ago, in order to attack his enemies. Michael Bristow is our East Asia editor.
This is quite an unusual concept which was developed and has been developed in communist countries, the Soviet Union and then China under Mao Zedong, as you've just mentioned there. Essentially what it is that people are forced to allow others to tell them what they've done wrong, and they themselves then have to explain to the audience what they've done wrong. So it's a kind of airing grievances, talking about how a person has performed. But of course, it can be quite a humiliating experience. Just imagine if you at work were asked by your boss to stand in front of everybody and say what you'd done wrong. It would be quite humiliating. And for members of the Politburo, we're talking about 25 people at the very top of China's Communist Party, for them to be forced to explain themselves in front of their colleagues must be quite a difficult thing to do.
And this is something that President Xi doesn't have to do.
Not usually. Usually the top leader, as with Mao Zedong, doesn't have to do this. Mao used this tool in actual fact to discredit his opponents, make them stand there, explain what they've done wrong, let people see how he's right and they're wrong. And indeed, in the report we get of the Politburo meeting in Xinhua, this is a state-run news agency, we hear not just that these Politburo members have had to engage in self-criticism, but also that they've got to explain how they're employing Xi Jinping's latest thoughts and ideas, how they're going to uphold his leadership. So essentially it's saying, Xi Jinping isn't getting enough support from these people.
So why is this happening now? I imagine there are a number of theories behind that.
It's difficult to say because, like all things with Chinese politics, we know very little. In Britain, for example, you could go to Parliament, you could hear regular press conferences from the Prime Minister, you go to all kinds of meetings and public events. In China, there just isn't that kind of access. There are a few major political speeches every year, but very little is known about the inner workings of the party. That's why this is so interesting, because we get a sort of like an insight to a meeting, an idea that there might be disagreements at the top. We don't know hardly anything about that.
Caring for an ageing population is something many countries are grappling with, but could technology be the answer? The BBC's Ed Butler has been visiting a care home in Japan where robots are used to help patients with dementia.
Well, I've now just stepped into a room of Mrs. Karasawa. On the bed next to her is a huge robotic seal. You can hear it mewing in the background there. What's the seal's name?
So he is Tama-chan, and he's a boy, and he is my grandson.
Almost a metre long, so he's quite a large seal. I'm with Mr. Mamiya, who's the manager of the care home here. Tell me, how does a robotic seal help with the elderly patients?
Tama-chan deals with especially the people with dementia. Often people with dementia have strong feeling that they want to go home. But after communicating, they become like, Tama-chan is cute. So that way they calm down and become feeling easier, stable.
Paolo the robot. This is now a humanoid robot, more or less like you might find in a toy shop. He's about 20 centimetres high. And what does he do?
This one is communication partner robot. So this one dances and does exercise so that the elderly people can do a rehabilitation by doing exercise and all that.
Well, you can hear him now. He started playing. Let's dance. Oh, it's a marching number. You're a country with falling birth rate, you've got a large elderly population. It's very difficult, presumably, to get staff to fill and work in all of the old people's homes here. Do you picture a future where robotics can supplement the actual human staffing?
As you say, Japan is aging, and also less and less children are born. So it's so clear that we will have too few people to take care of elderly. Right now, these robots are just one of the tools. But hopefully in the future, this could help us that we can run with few number of staff and they can cover, the gap of our works.
Shall we say goodbye to Paolo? It's been a pleasure meeting you and dancing with you. Bye-bye. Sayonara.
Bye-bye.
Ed Butler reporting. Still to come in this podcast, what do you do when you get a Christmas present you're not too happy with? There's violence in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where demonstrators have clashed with security forces after voting was postponed in 3 cities, Beni, Butembo and Yumbi, until March of 2019. The protesters claim this is a tactic aimed at rigging the ballot, as the cities are opposition strongholds. These people in Beni explained why they came out onto the streets.
We're demonstrating because we heard that Beni will not vote. They know that we want change, and that's why they're creating false excuses about Ebola.
All we're asking for is elections all over the country so that we can change the president. The current one has to leave power.
In Goma, protesters attacked an Ebola centre, burning down a couple of tents and stealing furniture. Our reporter, Gaius Kowene, is there.
In the town of Goma where we are, protesters took to the streets of Majengo, where they laid stones into the middle of streets and blocked circulation until police came, shot tear gas and then cleared the way out. In the town of Butembo, protesters I talked to on the phone say that they burned tires into the middle of the streets to express their anger. Now, in the town of Beni, protesters attacked an Ebola transit center where some people left and fled. The Ministry of Health issued a statement saying those who were there were not necessarily contaminated by Ebola virus, but they were under surveillance.
Well, the president, Joseph Kabila, who's outgoing and is not running, had promised what he called a perfect election. The BBC's Salim Kikeke in Kinshasa asked him what had happened to that assurance.
The idea was that Ebola is an epidemic which we manage or have been managing to control 2 months after it was declared. This time around, it has taken much longer than that. And as we speak right now, it's still spreading. So we have to contend with those 2 major issues. And of course, the choice is to save as many lives as possible.
With all that has happened, do you still have faith in the Electoral Commission to deliver a free and fair election?
The Electoral Commission is an independent commission, an independent electoral commission. And we still have faith in the commission. And come end of this year, meaning the 30th, elections will be organized.
But with 1.2 million voters being delayed in those areas we just mentioned, how are we going to declare a new president with some of the places that haven't voted?
Don't worry, the law has catered for such issues. So the Electoral Commission has, as far as I'm concerned, been doing everything according to the book. I don't think that there will be any major issues in as far as the 1.something million voters that you're talking about.
President Joseph Kabila. Rescuers are trying to save 15 miners trapped inside an illegal coal mine in a remote northeastern part of India after it collapsed 2 weeks ago. However, limited resources and lack of information about the mines in the area are making the operation extremely challenging. The hope of finding anyone alive is quickly fading. Davina Gupta travelled to the rescue site in the state of Meghalaya.
We have travelled from India's capital, Delhi, for a total of 12 hours to come to the remote northeastern part of the country. We head to see rescue operations at a hillside where 15 coal miners are believed trapped inside an illegal coal mine. It's a scene of utter confusion. Rescue workers dressed in orange suits are standing on top of piles of coal. They're trying to reach over to a dozen miners trapped in a 300 feet deep underground coal mine. What's making it more difficult is that the water that flooded the mine is still at the same level. They're trying to pump out this water, and so far only several broken helmets have been removed. The coal miners, all in their early 20s, are believed to be trapped in what is called a rat hole mine. It's a narrow pit dug on the side of a hill, which leads to small horizontal tunnels inside. The space is so small that workers have to lie on their back to pass through to reach a coal seam. These rat hole mines are illegal and have been banned since 2014 after high pollution levels started contaminating the rivers here. But the practice of extracting coal from them is still widespread. A crane is now being used to carry expert divers inside the flooded mine. The rescue team in charge, Santosh Kumar Singh, tells me there are at least 100 such underground pits in the area, and they could be interconnected.
This is one of the very complex and complicated type of rescue operations, since we do not have even the maps and the blueprints of the mining, and we even do not know the directions in which the laborers being trapped. Another big challenge that we are facing, the over-flooded mine, we are unable to pull out all the water.
A few kilometers away on a mountain top is the village of Lumthari. In a small white church, a group is praying for the trapped miners. One of the miners, 20-year-old Shabad Dhar, wanted to earn money at a coal mine to contribute at the church service on Christmas here. His mother is inconsolable. She covers her face with her hands when I ask about her son. Her last memory is of trying to stop him from working in a coal mine.
I stopped him, but he won't listen. I don't know what to feel anymore. My husband told me after 7 days. I couldn't even go to search for my son.
In a coal market nearby, it's a busy day. Small piles of raw coal rocks are spread out on a muddy ground. The coal shines in the sun. Workers are busy shoveling it in a wooden basket and then unloading it on a truck. Mining is a lucrative business here. Though this illegal practice is banned, traders are allowed to transport the coal that was already excavated. Activist Roseanne tells me that this is a loophole that is exploited by the traders to escape the law.
There's no, such health facilities for them, no sanitation for them. When they go in, they don't know when they're coming back.
Back at the flooded mine, the rescue operations are ending for the day. This place is a grim reminder of the lives that are risked every day in the belly of these hills for the greed of a few.
Davina Gupta reporting. Britain's Defence Secretary has added his voice to growing Western concerns about the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei. Both the US and Australia have already restricted the use of Huawei technology in their new networks because of worries that the Chinese government may use the hardware to harvest huge amounts of data. Huawei's denied it poses any sort of threat. What kind of equipment is Huawei making that causes concern? James Menendez has been speaking to cybersecurity expert Emily Taylor of the think tank Chatham House here in London.
The concerns at the moment surround an emerging technology, 5G, which will be the new super fast mobile broadband that will allow people to do things like download a movie in seconds and will enable the next generations of technology like machine-to-machine communication and smart cars and smart cities. Now, that technology is not yet fixed, and there's a sort of standards race going on between Western companies and Chinese companies to establish intellectual property in the standard that will be adopted. If a company is able to get its version of the standard adopted, then it has all sorts of commercial advantages and also security advantages because it alone will understand deeply how that technology has been built up and also potentially what its vulnerabilities may be.
If people in the West are worried about a company like Huawei, I mean, it would make sense, one would have thought, for countries just simply to use its own companies to do this stuff and to make sure that they're adequately resourced to provide the technology.
Well, that is one way of thinking, and countries such as the United States, for example, has had import bans on Chinese telecommunications equipment for certain government departments for some time. However, it's not that easy. It's not that easy for any one country, even the most technologically advanced country, to provide all of its own equipment from domestically sourced partners.
And presumably the other point to make is that if China does want to spy on us for whatever reason, but if it's industrial espionage, it can do so in other ways.
The unfortunate truth is that our general level of cybersecurity internationally is not what it should be. And therefore, if you do want to do hacking, espionage or disruption, unfortunately, it's a lot easier than it should be already. There's no need for you to get in at the infrastructure level. However, if you are at the infrastructure level, it gives you a level of potential control and access to all traffic, all data that goes on those networks. So it is an extremely powerful position to be in, whether or not you choose to abuse that position.
Emily Taylor speaking to James Menendez. Now, we don't always get what we want or what we ask for at Christmas, but often our disappointment is brushed under the carpet with a smile and a polite, "Oh, thanks." However, one young boy in the northern German town of Wilhelmshaven was having none of it, and he decided to involve the police in what was clearly a tricky case of the wrong presents. Mike Sanders has been investigating.
The call came in from the boy himself, 9 years old, and not at all happy with the Christmas presents he'd been given. He asked the police to take action, which they dutifully did. They went to his house and made a forensic comparison between the wish list that he'd submitted in good time and the presents that materialised under the Christmas tree. They were able to ascertain that there was indeed a grievous mismatch. But who to blame? The parents or Father Christmas? Officers were able to convince the boy that Santa had somehow confused his list with that of another child. Case solved and family harmony restored. Santa's data protection policy prevents us from revealing the contents of the list.
And that's all from us for now, but there will be an updated version of the Global News podcast later. If you want to comment on this podcast or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Nick Miles. Until next time, goodbye.